program next week. It's a holiday. The week after, the speaker will be Casey Sherman, and he'll be talking about the assassination of John Lennon, the Beatle John Lennon. Okay. I also want to tell everybody that we rent this beautiful building. We call it our hidden gem. And with the holidays coming up, wouldn't it be a wonderful place to have a Christmas party? All your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, the out-of-towners. Hell, you'll be a hero. So it's all on our website. And if you'd like to rent this beautiful courthouse, or you know of someone, let us know. And I handle it, and I'll be nice to you. Tonight, our sponsors are Jean and Susan Gill, John and Elizabeth Lewis, and with the help of the Town of Barnstable Tourism Grant. Had to get that in. So our wonderful Marty Sandler will speak about his book, The Widow. Oh, I want to say Widow. Widow. His book is called The Widow, Feared, Wrecked, and Found, published in 2019, and it was a finalist for the Excellence in Young Adult Nonfiction Award. Marty has written, are you ready for this? Over 70 books for children and adults, produced and written 7 television series. He's been nominated twice for a Pulitzer Prize, and twice and has won multiple Emmy Awards, so pretty darn good.
Yeah, for a kid from New Bedford.
Tonight I would like to dedicate this lecture to Carol Sandler, who's Marty's wonderful wife. She passed away a couple months ago. And you know, they say behind every great man is a great woman. Carol was the great woman behind that great man. We love her, we miss her, and I want to just say tonight, oh, I loved her so. She was a partner as well as your wife too, Marty. So this is for you, Carol. And now it's my honor to introduce my fabulous Marty Sandler.
She always makes it sexual. Thank you all. Wow, what a great audience on such a terrible night. Thank you very, very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I just finished a tour of the United States, and I want to tell you it's good to be back with real people, so thank you very, thank you very much. The book I did on the widow was actually part of I was going to do a much bigger book, which I am now doing now, based on just one sentence. I've never done a book based on one sentence, but that one sentence that I read somewhere, I don't even remember where I read it, is the vast ocean floor is the world's greatest museum. And you know, it says it all. It really does, because we find there's more down there. There are 3 million shipwrecks lying at the bottom of the sea. And certainly Cape Cod has more than its share. And when they excavate on land, 90% of the time, they find it's been looted or it's moved around. But when a ship goes down, when a ship goes down, it kills the author. When a ship goes down, it goes down, and it immediately becomes a time capsule. And it is not what we find down there, it's what we find out. And what we have found out is amazing. So this book, let me just give you Somebody stop me after 40 minutes or you'll be here till tomorrow morning. This is just the introduction. Anyway, but just let me give you an example of one of the stories in this other book that has about 7 of these things. In 1900, the first real excavation of a shipwreck took place. And the ship was found, as were most of the early shipwrecks that were found, by Turkish sponge divers. They were the ones who were going down there with reeds. I mean, my God, with reeds to breathe and go down quickly, see what they could find. And off the island of Antikythera, Greece, in the Turkish border, they went down. And when they looked, a couple of guys who went down, they came up and their eyes were like this. They said, "There's a bunch of naked women lying on the bottom of the ocean." What it was, there were a bunch of incredible statues. Greek statues, priceless. The museum, and there had never been a find of antiquity ever of Greek things. This is in 1900. The ship was 3,000 years old. And they found these things and they start bringing them up. It's at a time, this is the last excavation that takes place before the birth of marine archaeology, because there's nothing scientific about it. You go down, you grab it, you bring it up. And they were bringing up vases, and they were bringing up statues, and they were bringing up everything. And you couldn't, if you've heard me speak before, I'm sure you've heard me say this, that when I used to write, a long time ago, I used to have a little sign at my desk saying, "You couldn't make this up." Well, you couldn't make up what I'm about to tell you. I mean, they went down, and among all these incredible things that they were taking immediately to the National Museum in Athens, they found this bunch of metal. And they were going to throw it away. And then one of the guys said, "Nah, keep it." So they took it to the museum, and the museum people put it in a cupboard in the corner. 30 years later, a very well-known curator from another museum was paying a visit, and he stumbled on that. And he said, "What's this?" He said, "It's a bunch of metal we should have got." He said, "Well, let me look." And he looks at it, and he sees there's ancient inscriptions in the middle of it. And he sees there's gears inside it. And he says, "If I were you, I'd get this x-rayed." So they got it x-rayed, and then it took 2 years to clean it up. It's the world's first computer. 3,000 years ago, 3,000 years old, probably made by or invented by Archimedes. When they finally get it today, if you use it, what it did, it predicted within the second when the next Olympic Games would take place. It predicted within the second when the next lunar eclipse was going to take place. It predicted within the second when the next solar eclipse. It's an amazing, amazing story. What happens right after that is there's another shipwreck found off of a place called Cape Gelidonia. And that one, there's a guy who is an archaeologist who says, "We're not going to just send divers down. Archaeologists have to learn to dive. And then when they get down there, they have to start plotting out and everything and make it scientific." And that's what happens. So anyway, now we jump ahead in this book to what I wrote a whole book about. And mainly we're interested here tonight because it really is a Cape Cod story. And it's one of the greatest of all the Cape Cod stories. And it's a magnificent story because it's not just filled with adventure. It's filled with ghosts. It's filled with mysticism. It's a great love story that may or may not have taken place. It's filled with a woman who still may walk the dunes of Wellfleet. We just don't know. There are people who swear they hear her every night. I've got an uncle who hears a lot of people every night, but that's another story. Anyway, the story starts with a man named Sam Bellamy. Sam Bellamy was a soldier in the British Army, one of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. When the War of Succession, the war with England against Spain and France ended, the British emptied all of its rolls of soldiers. They couldn't afford to pay him anymore, and Bellamy was one of them. So he came to America. If for some reason he came to Cape Cod. If for some reason he came to Barnstable. If for some reason under a tree in Barnstable, supposedly, he met Maria Hallett, this gorgeous 15-year-old young woman, and they fell in love. Her parents were scandalized. They were wealthy people, and she's going to marry this penniless sailor? Baloney. So he said to her, I am going to get rich, and I'm going to come back and show your parents how rich I am, and then I'm going to take you away, and I'm going to buy you your own island. Now, that's the story. It may or may not be true, but what is true, and what has been authenticated, and believe me, I've looked it up, what is true is that he had a plan for getting rich. He had a friend. I love the names in the old days, right? He had a friend named Palsgrave Williams. How do you like to be called Palsgrave? But anyway, Palsgrave was the son of the Attorney General of Rhode Island. And Palsgrave had a lot of money, and Palsgrave had a boat. So Palsgrave said, I'll go partners with you, and we'll go over we'll go down to Florida, where they had just had that incredible storm, and where those 4 treasure ships going between France and between Florida and Spain kept going back and forth, and where they sunk, and where there are millions of dollars in treasure. And we're going to get it, and we're going to get rich. And William said to himself, Bellamy said to himself, and then I will go get Maria and show her parents how rich I am. So they went, and they dove down. And oh, by the way, Palsgrave Williams' money paid for a crew of 9. They all dove down, and there was nothing there. And the reason there was nothing there is the Spanish, 2 weeks before, had come taking it all away. Well, how could they go back home when they had bragged that they were coming back rich? So Bellamy had an idea. We'll become pirates. We'll become pirates, and we'll get rich that way. And damned if he didn't. He had no training as a pirate. I don't think there's pirate college, but anyway, he started capturing ship after ship, so much so that the number 1 pirate in the world at that time was a guy named Benjamin Hornigold. This is all true. You couldn't make it up. Benjamin Hornigold found out about him. Benjamin Hornigold had an assistant pirate, a guy named Edward Teach. He was better known as Blackbeard. But anyway, that's another story. I could hold you here for 4 hours on that one. But anyway, they said, why don't you join us? So Bellamy and his crew joined them. And Bellamy became so good. Now, here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing about the pirate story is the pirates had the most democratic society in the world. We're finding that out more and more by what's being pulled up out of that widow today, even today. At any time, they could have an election and get rid of the captain and pick somebody else. And they did it. And they picked Sam Bellamy. So Hornigold is gone. Bellamy is now the captain. And he's doing terrific. They're getting richer and richer. But the problem is they don't have a very fast ship. But one day they're sailing and they see this incredible ship out there. And so they chase it. And they're going to capture it and they're going to make it their ship. And they do. And it happens to be a ship called the Widder. Now, that's not a very good story because the Widder is is in the most infamous trade in the history of the world. It's a slave ship. And it's part of that terrible, terrible, terrible triangular trade in which slaves were brought to the New World and traded for molasses. That whole, you all maybe learned it in school if your teacher was any good. But anyway, they capture it. They totally get rid of all the slave pens, all of that stuff, and they turn it into a pirate vessel. And they just become the most successful pirates going. They are absolute, and Bellamy becomes the Robin Hood of pirates. He absolutely becomes the Robin Hood. When he captures a ship, instead of killing the captain, instead of throwing him overboard, by the way, they didn't make anybody walk the plank. That's baloney. You know, if they wanted to get rid of somebody, they would have cut his head off or thrown him into the ocean. And they didn't say arg. And they didn't have pirates on their sleeve. And they didn't have patches. None of that stuff. Okay, I'm sorry to break your heart, but they didn't. But anyway, they are getting richer and richer and richer. And while all this is going on, and they're getting richer and more richer, Bellamy tells them they're going to go north off the coast of Maine, where there's a great trade avenue on the sea, and get more ships. And suddenly, while they're sailing there, he said, I changed my mind. Now, by this time, it's the most democratic society there is. Would you believe they have the first workmen's compensation plans? The pirates. You can find, when I did my research, I found the charters they had. When you sign this thing, if you lose an arm, you get so much money. If you lose 2 arms, you get much more money. If you lose a leg and an arm, you get this much money. I mean, it's extraordinary. Anyway, he's going to go up to Maine, and they're going to get more ships, and they're going to get more money. And suddenly, he announces, no, we're not. We're going back to Cape Cod. We're going to Cape Cod. To this day, nobody really knows why he went back to Cape Cod. Did he go back? Because as part of this democratic thing, he had already taken all the money they had gotten so far, which according to the resources I've seen, according to the research I've done, according to what Barry Clifford, who found the widow, has told me, there was probably about $800 million in today's money in pouches, all designated by the names of the different crew. Now, the crew is unlike any crew you could ever imagine in those days. There's whites and blacks and Hispanics. They all have certain rights. It's an and they all have their portion of pay they're going to get when they're finally over. So it may have been that Bellamy said, how much more money do we need? Because they really did have enough money in those days. They could have retired for the rest of their lives. Anyway, he heads back to Cape Cod. He's supposedly going back to see Maria. Meanwhile, Maria's had a few problems. First of all, he left her a little present. She was pregnant when he left. And so now the town, she's almost like the Scarlet Letter. The town has, they didn't put an A on her chest, but they might as well have. So she's had a hard time. And she thinks he's abandoned her, but he hasn't. If she did live, we'll never know if there really was a Maria Helen. But anyway, we do know he headed back to Cape Cod. But he's Sam Bellamy. So instead of just going back, he finds out there's this wicked storm coming. And these guys are pretty good mariners just by looking at the sky. And they know it, but he sees another ship. He can't help himself. He's got no room to put any more plunder. He's trying to get to Cape Cod. There's a storm coming. Oh no, he's got to go capture this ship. So he captures it. And there's a Captain Montgomery in charge. And Captain Montgomery really knows Cape Cod because he's been sailing these waters forever. So he does what he always does. He doesn't kill Montgomery. He doesn't kill the men. He lets them have their ship, but he puts some of his sailors to run it. But now he's heading back the Cape, and suddenly the storm just hits. And he has no idea of how to navigate the waters of Cape Cod, but off of Wellfleet, you've heard of these places, off of Truro, that's where he is. But he knows Montgomery does. So he says to Montgomery, I'll make a deal with you. If you come on my ship and get us, your ship and my ship, safely over to, it's called Cape Cod Harbor in those days. It's really Provincetown Harbor. If you get me into that harbor safely, I'll give you back your ship. And I'll give you back your men. Montgomery says, fine. Montgomery has no intention. He's so angry at what has happened. So Montgomery, whose ship has much less draft than the Widow, knows that he can sail over sandbars that he knows are there. The Widow can't. He leads him directly to the sandbars. He sails over it. Whack! The Widow hits it and breaks up. And they all croak, except some of the men on the other ship who escape and start heading for Eastham. That's another story that I'll tell you about in a minute. I could keep you here for 4 days, you know. So I hope you all brought food. But anyway. So anyway, now in Boston, the news is reached. The news reaches Boston where the governor finds out this incredible black Sam Bellamy ship with tens and tens of millions of dollars has crashed off of Wellfleet. Now get this name. He appoints Cyprian Southack. How do you like to go through life with Cyprian Southack? Although Cyprian Southack was quite famous. Cyprian Southack was the best map maker in America at that time. There are still maps that Cape Cod mariners use to avoid shoals and avoid sandbars that were done by Southack in the 1700s. Can you believe? That's another story. But Southack's supposed to find the ship that is sunk and get the treasure. Okay? Meanwhile, it's off Cape Cod. These are Cape Codders. They ain't going to tell the truth of where it went down. And they sure in hell ain't giving them back any treasure they found. There was a very, very popular prayer, and I found it in every church, every meeting house in the Cape in those days. And it said, "Oh God, please may there not be any shipwrecks. But if there is, please make it be at my front door." Okay? The teachers and the kids used to sit by the window and look out, waiting to see the next shipwreck. And if the shipwreck occurred, the teachers would trample the kids trying to get down to it. By the time, now, first of all, there's an interesting story because Southack lands sort of off of Orleans, and you know where the Orleans Rotary is? That's where he was. There was a canal there, a natural canal. In fact, the first Cape Cod Canal started to be dug there. But he followed this natural, they had very shallow boats, and then when they couldn't go any further at times, they picked him up and carried him, and he gets all the way to Wellfleet. Well, of course, it's all been picked clean, except that what went down. I mean, anything that washed ashore. So he issues a statement. Anybody, we are going to go check every house and every barn, and anybody who is holding any treasure from that there ship is going to jail. You know, everywhere they go, "Oh, we didn't see anything, we didn't see anything." You know, they had taken all the stuff that was there. Anyway, meanwhile, these 5 guys have escaped, okay? But you know what? Instead of running away, they hit the first tavern. You know, Jesus, they meant to see. Instead of just going inland, they're at a tavern and they get caught. So they're brought to trial, and it's one of the most famous trials because here's the first pirates in history in North America that have ever been caught. And you know who gets involved? Some of you, when you went to school, heard of Cotton Mather, one of the great minds of the 2nd century. Oh my God. Cotton Mather, day by day comes in, confess, please confess. When they're walking through the town to the jail, he's walking beside them. When they're walking to be hanged, he's walking beside them, confess. They find these 5 guys guilty. You know what they did? They hung them from lampposts in downtown Boston and let them hang there for a year so that they would rot and the parts of their body would fall off as a deterrent to further piracy. Now, I'm a practicing coward, so it doesn't take much for me, but I'll tell you, that would have discouraged me, I'll tell you. First arm that fell off, I'm gone. But anyway, that's another side story. Years and years later, and you have to buy the book to really know all of this, or get it out of the library. It's a great book, and it's brilliantly written. Anyway, problem is I believe it. Barry Clifford, this guy Barry Clifford, who's a Cape Codder, and who has grown up with his grandfather telling him stories of this ship, the Widow. And he goes to the same place I went quite a few years later, right where the University of Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Archives in another building. And there you can see Cyprian Southack's diary. And you can see Cyprian, who's the best map maker in America, you can see the map he drew with a big X. The Witter is right there. And so Clifford says he's going to find the Witter. And he spends millions of dollars from investors. I mean, if you can ever get the money that was in there, probably it's worth $7 or $8 billion today, in today's money. They have found a lot of stuff. They haven't found that money. They found coin. They haven't found that money. But they look and they look. The problem is that same area is where, on shore in that area, is where the first Marconi wireless station was built. When they knocked it down to build a new one, they threw all the towers into the ocean there. So they kept coming across towers. In World War II, that's where they practiced the PT boats there. So they kept, and one day some guy finds this incredible casing thing. Maybe it's from the Witter. He brings it up. And the first thing they say is, run, it's a bomb. And it was. It was a bomb. Thank God it didn't go off. But then one day, after they are so discouraged, and after Clifford is about to go bankrupt, they find, now everything, when you find them down there, and I've done so much research on this, I know it's all encrusted. It's all, you have to take time and you have to pick and get it. But they come up with this thing, and they're talking on primitive. It's not like now, but in primitive, even though it's in the 1980s. Today, it'd be very different, but they're talking in primitive ship-to-shore things. But listen, this looks like there could be a bell in there. That's the thing when they're looking for ancient shipwrecks. They look for the bell, because the bell has the name of the ship on it, and it has the date of it. And so they go into this laboratory, and they're all gathered around. I can only imagine what it must have been like in there. And they're chipping very carefully away, and finally a big enough piece falls off. And it says the Witter, 1717. So he's found the Witter. And it's an incredible, there are so many aspects to this story. The first two people to dive down to that wreck when they found out where it were Clifford and a young kid from Brown University who was taking the summer off and who had volunteered to help. And they went down and they said, well, this looks interesting. You know who that kid was? How do you know that? You read my book. Yeah, John F. Kennedy Jr. May he rest in peace. There are just so many different aspects to this story. Anyway, they have pulled up. It's the biggest thing of all, as I said to you earlier, it's not what you find, it's what you find out. I'm going to backtrack a little bit now, but the next excavation after that Antikythera excavation, where they just went down and pulled all this stuff up and then found this computer, was at this Cape Jaladonia. And that's when this guy, George Bass, who really became the father of marine archaeology, he's the guy who went down and said, when they made him learn to dive. They wouldn't let him head the expedition, so he went to the YMCA, spent 6 straight weeks learning to dive. Scared to death, but he learned to dive. And today, when they go down, from that point on, it wasn't just amateur or professional divers. It was archaeologists going down. And they map out the floor, and they say, this is where this is found. This is where we got to look next. And they bring it up they do it as scientifically as anything that's done on land, which, I never could do that because I have the patience of a gnat. But that's how they do it. Jaladonia is the first time they do that. And from that time on, they have a whole new science called marine archaeology, which goes on today. Just doing the research for this book, during the Civil War, the Confederate States, everybody knows that, everybody has heard the story of the most famous ship during the Civil War, and it's the Monitor, because it's the first ironclad. And you got the Monitor and the Virginia, although we know it as the Merrimack, and the first, but the most important ship is not that ship, although, well, in a way it is, because that changes the whole nature. Ships from that on go from wood to metal, so I guess it's the important. But the most important of that particular era, there's a ship called the H.L. Hunley. I'm sure none of you ever heard of you did. How do you know about the Hunley? How do you know about that? I hate it when the audience knows more than me. Who let him in? Yeah, good for you. The H.L. Hunley was the first submarine to sink another ship, to sink a ship. It sank the Housatonic, which was a northern ship blockading the southern ports. And it was built like a cigar. It was built to hold 7 men, 7 crew members sitting there with this whole big screw propeller, turning the propeller like this, while the captain guided it up and down by letting out water or bringing in water. I mean, talk about primitive. And what it had in the beginning, it was towing a bomb. And what they were going to do is go underneath the ship they were trying to sink and then have the bomb come up and plank itself on the ship and blow up. Didn't quite work very well. So then they came up with another idea. We'll put a big spar on the front of the ship with a bomb in the end, and we'll just ram the ship. And so it's a whole other story where it sank 3 times, and the guy who invented it died, and the whole thing. But they finally get it working, the Confederates do. And it goes down under this Housatonic, which is this huge ship. And it's an important northern ship. How the hell did I get from there to Germany? Oh, never mind. Anyway. And it goes down, and it rams it, and it blows it up, and it's the first ship ever sunk, enemy ship ever sunk by a submarine. But nobody can find the Housatonic. I mean, nobody can find the Hunley. They just couldn't find it. And to this day, we don't know where it is. It eventually got found. To this day, we don't know why. They find it, and when they find it, they find the crew members still at their posts. They never even try to escape. And what's that? Oh, you can ask me any question. I'm open to questions. Okay. I thought you were going to ask me how handsome I am. Never mind. There are all kinds of theories as to what happened. The point is, do you know who found? You know, so shut up. You know who found that ship? Any of you read a book by Clive Cussler, Dirk Pitt? Clive Cussler in the Dirk Pitt novels has an organization called the National Underwater Marine Agency, NUMA. In real life, he formed his own agency, NUMA. And he found a whole bunch of sunken ships. He found the Hunley. And what they're theorizing now, the latest theory, is that when they blew up, it created such sound shock waves that it so stunned that crew that they died. All I can tell you is they found the ship with the 8 guys there. I mean, it was an incredible. But now back to Sam Bellamy. I have no idea how I got to this other place. Anyway, what they have been pulling up from the Witter is, where am I? Oh, yikes! Is an incredible story. It first of all, it has changed almost everything we ever knew about the pirates. You know, we thought they were a bunch of thugs with sabers. Exactly. We found the way they were dressed, and the way and all the clothes that they had. They were hardly badly dressed. They were dressed like gentlemen. In an age when sailors all ate out of this big bowl with their hands, they had very sophisticated cutlery. They had very sophisticated plates and forks and knives and cups and glasses. the most important thing of all is they had, the seals where you seal a letter or you seal a document. Some of those seals were the most sentimental stuff you'd ever imagine. Love letters to people. We do not think of black-hearted pirates sending love letters to their girlfriends. They did. They found letters down there, too. So, again, it's not what you find, it's what you find out. And, there's been a lot of criticism of Clifford because this is not, he's hardly an archaeologist, although he had archaeologists with him. But they did not do it in a scientific way. I mean, what they did is they backed the surface vessel over the site and then pounded those motors as hard as they could in reverse. And it went down below and it created this enormous hole, and up came artifacts. But that is hard. I mean, archaeologists would faint at that thing. But it's been an incredible, and I'm sure some of you have been to the Whittam Museum and seen some of the stuff that's come up. They found this Arcan jewelry, which is the greatest, they found the greatest collection of this African jewelry in the world, which is priceless and rare. The biggest, one of the they have made, they still are down there. I'm sure they're still looking for those $7 billion worth of, and maybe one of these days they'll find it. But what has happened is that about 2 months ago, they found 7 skeletons. The first time they found human remains. They're trying to get DNA to see if one of them is Black Sam Bellamy. Meanwhile, the next time it is a full moon over Wellfleet, we could organize an expedition and we could walk the dunes and we could see if we can hear Maria Hallett calling for Sam, pissed off because she's sure he abandoned her. But it's an extraordinary story. It truly is. And I was privileged to have been able to write it, and you couldn't make it up. And if you're not going to buy my book when it comes out, get it out of the library, because the story, there's a story of the Mary Rose in there. I mean, I love what happens before they find the damn ships. The Mary Rose was King Henry VIII's flagship. And he devoted almost as much time lusting after the Mary Rose as he did after all the women he married. And it was his pride and joy. And all of a sudden, France, for about the 700th time, attacks England. And so now they got to send the fleet out. Now, the Mary Rose, this is in 1545, excuse me. In 1545, the Mary Rose is the first ship ever built with portholes and guns sticking out that can fire a barrage fire. Now, it can't turn. I mean, that's another ship in my book, and that's the Monitor, which had the revolving gun turret. But this one can fire a barrage. And so it's the flagship. And when the French invade, and they invade with a bigger fleet than the Spanish Armada is going to invade 40 years later, they invade in the English Channel, and out goes the British to meet them, led by the Mary Rose. And on shore is King Henry VIII and his entourage cheering them on. And the shouldn't laugh at this, but the Mary Rose goes out, and then it sees the first French ship, so it turns and it fires its salvo. And now it goes to turn again, and a gust of wind comes up, and it sort of tilts, and guess what? The crew forgot to shut the portholes. And all the water comes in, and after 15 minutes of glory, King Henry VIII's $9 billion ship goes right down to the bottom. It's an incredible story. It becomes very serious because the search for the Mary Rose takes forever, and they finally find it. And it becomes, eventually, you have to read this story because you couldn't make it up. It becomes the only ship in history that's been excavated full ship, not parts. They bring the entire ship up. They find a way to put a cradle underneath it, to get the cradle under it, to bring it up. And in 1987, I think it is, the largest audience in the history to that time, more than the Super Bowl, is watching all over the world. As suddenly, boom, there's an explosion in the ocean and this ship pops up. It's an incredible moment. And I've been there in Southampton, England. You can go and see the Mary Roses on display. Portsmouth, sorry. Get that guy out of here. He knows more than me. Go ahead, tell him about it. Come on, wise guy, tell him about it. I am delighted you know this much.
Well, I'm from a town, too, that's got one of the greatest shipwrecks in the United States. That's the Arabian.
Yeah.
I'm from Kansas City. And the artifacts that are preserved from both of those wrecks are like stepping into a time machine. It's
That's right.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it is. And what's wonderful about the story of the Mary Rose, it's a story above everything else of conservation. They spent 20 years, 24 hours a day pouring water on it. Because you have something down there for 400 years. If you just bring it up, it's going to disintegrate. So they're just pouring water on it and saving every kind of thing, the fabric, the leather, the metal, everything has to have its own kind of conservation. But it's an extraordinary story. I mean, you know, I grew up in New Bedford, but I was always afraid of boats. So, you know, it's amazing. It's an amazing story. So anyway, that's the story of the widow thus far. And we'll see what happens. Where did you get that great dog mask? I keep looking at that dog. Would you stand up so everybody can see that mask? That looks like the girl I took to the prom. Anyway, I've gotten a couple of emails. I got several emails from you guys asking me to talk about. I'll stop in a minute. What I'm writing now. During the Great Depression, everybody's out of work, everybody's broke. And Franklin Roosevelt formed all these government alphabet agencies that you all learned about. And the biggest of them all was the FSA, the Farm Security Administration. And the reason it was the biggest is because we were still a nation of farmers. And it was to help the farmers, to relocate them. They were all going broke, to teach them how to maybe farm better, to lend them money. And they got this guy, Roy Stryker, who was a genius from Columbia to lead it. But they all knew, Roosevelt knew, that they were going to have such trouble with Congress getting refunded every year. So they formed this historical division within it. And it was just a name. It was a name for a division that was going to have 10 photographers. And they were going to take propaganda pictures showing the farm agents, FSA agents helping the farmers. And when Stryker went to find photographers, he suddenly realized the photographers are out of work like everybody else. I can pick anybody. So he picked Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans and Gordon Parks. He picked the 10 greatest photographers in the world, practically. And when they started taking these terribly dull pictures of, Stryker said, "We don't want this stuff." He realized the opportunity they had. He said, "You go out and show the good and the bad, capture the era, introduce America to Americans." And they took 250,000 photographs. And it's the greatest photographic collection. Never again will we ever have the opportunity for the government to pour that kind of money into the 10 greatest photographers in the world to capture an era. And that's the book I'm doing. And it isn't even out yet, and it's got the greatest reviews in the history of reviews. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, modest as I am, you know. I mean, the New York Times has already called it, "This will win the next National Book Award." From their lips to God's ears. But anyway, So that's the book. That's one of the books I'm doing now. And my son and I have just written a book about baseball. We've written about the greatest season that we think the greatest season of all time, 1941, a year in which Ted Williams hit 406, which no one ever else will do, and that wasn't the best thing the biggest thing that happened. Joe DiMaggio hit in 56 straight games, which is impossible. The Yankees had won 6 straight World Series, but they were going to lose until Mickey Owen dropped the 3rd strike on the Dodgers and all that. So thank you for keeping up with me. I love my groupies. And I love speaking to Tales of Cape Cod. And anytime you want me, you ask me. All right? And I love you out there, Miss Wallace. And thank you very much. Thank you. How do you pronounce H-O-P? How do you pronounce H-O-P? Wait a minute, first of all, did you hear about the woman who fell into the upholstery machine? No. She's recovered. Did you hear about the Boy Scout convention? It was intense. Did you hear about the 2 antennas that got married? The wedding was awful, but the reception was terrific. Thank you, guys.